Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. This video is about the Constitution. It's about the pure principles that went into the Constitution in their pure form. There's a reason why there are amendments in the Constitution, because it was a work in progress that's based on certain pure principles, which are the essence of American values when we're looking at it in terms of secularism. Because many Americans put God before the Constitution, at least as their stated argument. But when we're talking about American values and what is the highest law in the secular land from a secular view, and we're talking about the Constitution and its essence, which is the pure principles that went into the Constitution. The people who oppose these principles are like these corporations who are basically the modern King George, if you will. They look for ways to exert more power and to control people and to get more bang for their buck, more control for their money, more prestige, what have you. So there's a line in the sand whether people want to admit it or not. And if we maintain the trajectory we're on, it doesn't look very good for the good guys. People have to scramble and they have to organize to do what's right. So first, let's address how we come to the pure principles of the Constitution. For example, when we're talking about the Bible, there's 20,000 denominations in America alone. 20,000 denominations of Christianity. So if one was going to use the Bible, if one was to use the Bible as some kind of book that tells them how to live their life, and they were going to try to apply it to the whole country, you'd have many, many different interpretations and views on what the Bible is saying in various places. But fortunately, when we're talking about the Constitution, we can use logic in a way that people are more likely to agree with to determine what the pure principles are. So let's look at the Declaration of Independence, which was written around the time of the Constitution. In it, it says that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So what is it saying and what isn't it saying? Did Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and Patrick Henry, etc., did they believe that we were all exactly the same? No. Not everybody in the colonies wrote the Declaration of Independence together or something. Not everybody was at the various conventions. Not everybody worked together to make the Constitution. They had certain social orders. They had various distributions of wealth. They were aware of hereditary ailments to some degree. They knew that not everyone there was treated equal. At the time, women didn't have the right to vote. Slaves didn't have the right to vote. So why over time did we include people of color and women in the voting process? Because people were trying to follow the pure principles that went into the Constitution, and they were trying to remove the dross, if you will, to remove the impurities. The people who made the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they weren't perfect. And their intentions aren't more important than the pure principles. For example, if we're going to use the Bible as an example again, the people who wrote the Bible aren't as important as Christ. Their intentions weren't as important. Quite often they seem to say things that seem to contradict each other. We see the Bible talks about how the disciples didn't all agree, and they broke into camps. And in popular culture, this is how we got our different churches to some degree, right? These disagreements expressing themselves in various forms. So what are the pure principles? What is this equality that they're talking about? They meant that if somebody was to be murdered by somebody, that the suspect should be arrested and brought to trial, and there should be a fair trial, etc. No one should be seen as above the law. They meant that they should have a right to self-determination within reason in regards to how the colonies are governed. They were governed from abroad with the English system, and they did not include these people in the process. That is very key here, because communists and conservatives alike, they don't understand the argument very well, and they go different ways with it, generally speaking. They did not mean that everybody is as smart as everyone else, or as rich as everyone else, or as attractive as everyone else. They did not mean that it was proven definitively who was superior to who, and in what ways. That's very key here, because we need to agree on the pure principles of the Constitution. We don't need to agree on, what ice cream is best, what sports team is best, who to vote for president, per se. But we need to agree on the pure principles of the Constitution. These principles included the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech, the right to a fair trial, the freedom of the press, etc. And so when we're looking at this case of the psychological operations that are being run in America, why people are playing stupid, why law enforcement's helping them, the military, the intelligence community, why people are turning a blind eye, why the officials who are supposed to guarantee your constitutional rights are turning a blind eye. You need to understand that they're continuing in a way that is not upholding the pure principles of the Constitution deliberately. The Supreme Court is not doing its job. The checks and balances system has failed. Now, why did it fail? Because people didn't come together and insist on the pure principles that went into the Constitution. White supremacy was something that needed to be purged from the Constitution, and still needs to be purged because people are not applying the principles in truth, and the document can be made better. You need to add amendments to perfect it. But more importantly, people need to have an understanding of the pure principles. You're not supposed to run psychological operations on people for the corporate elite. You're not supposed to be afraid to support your fellow citizen when he seeks to secure his constitutional rights. Now let me give you one example, and we'll wrap this video up here, and I'll probably make a part 2 and make this a playlist. If a bunch of police officers were to come into your home and they were to abuse you and sexually assault you and your family and take your stuff, while the community was smirking and saying, we don't see anything, is that upholding the Constitution? No. Because the right to a fair trial is a package deal. The right to not having unreasonable search and seizures is a package deal. What I mean by this, if that occurs and you try to take them to court or you report it, they're supposed to help you get a conviction. That's part of the court system, the fair trial. The victim has a right to a fair trial, and so does the suspect. And if the community is playing stupid and law enforcement is playing stupid, they're denying both of them the right to a fair trial. It might work in one of their favor in a sense, because they get acquitted when they should be convicted. But they still didn't get a fair trial. Because you're guilty and it's clear cut, and it's a fair trial, you should be punished. Pretty straightforward, right? And so it is in this case, where they cheated me out of my health while the community and law enforcement and the military played stupid. They cheated me out of my money and of my right to pursue happiness. They denied me my freedom of speech and freedom of religion. They interfered with it. They infringed upon it. They did so in the name of white, Jewish, and LGBT supremacy, in the name of the corporate elite, not in the name of God or in the name of the Constitution. And so part of upholding the Constitution is securing me fair compensation. There are witnesses to what has happened here that are like the grains of sand on the beach. There are so many witnesses. I have 23 witnesses on record, but there's so many other people in the area, people outside of the area. They know for sure that this has happened. And because there's so many witnesses, there's a multitude, if you will, that part of doing the Constitution justice, part of being on the right side of the war between the white supremacists, like Hitler, who was inspired by white supremacists in America, and those who want to uphold the pure principles of the Constitution, is securing compensation for me. And keep in mind, there's 22.5 millionaires and billionaires in America. People often feel some kind of way when somebody gets money. Someone wins the lotto, they're like, that lucky bastard. Should they let that get in the way of them securing the pure principles of the Constitution in this nation for themselves, their communities, their friends, their family, their offspring? No. So I would get some money. Why is that a big deal? People are too concerned with racism and pettiness and greed. Part of the Constitution is my right to declare what I believe is superior, whether it's my religion or myself. And you shouldn't be more concerned with confounding my argument than securing the pure principles of the Constitution, or you're probably living in the wrong country, right? Because this country is supposed to commit itself to the Constitution. If as a consequence of me being compensated, people start looking up to me, I start gaining a lot of social power, and so be it. You should have thought of that before. You brought credence to my other arguments by persecuting me. If I'm not right, why are you persecuting me? Well, we can agree to disagree on whether or not I'm right. But only a monster would disagree with me about whether or not the pure principles in their universal form, not white supremacy form, that went into the Constitution, the morally precise principles, should be upheld, which involves compensating me for these crimes against humanity that have been committed against me. These crimes against the Constitution, these crimes against the most important values in America, the core cultural values of America that have occurred here.